Guys, we are so excited to have you join us for another Coastal Classroom lesson. This one is our 6th grade Losing the Edge. So I am Miss Sam and Miss Sarah will be joining me later. We are with the South Louisiana Wetlands Discovery Center out of Houma, Louisiana. And today's lesson has to deal with looking at the importance of marsh and different types of marsh habitat like edge habitat and what we can do to help prevent or to help protect and restore the populations that are affected when habitat fragmentation starts to occur. So let's go see Miss Sarah.
So let's talk about resources and populations. So resources are things that we use. So food, water, shelter, and even the air around us. And all species need resources, right? So populations of species are actually distributed based on resources and where those resources are. So if there's a lot of resources in one area, you'll see a lot of populations there. If there's no resources, there won't be many populations. And populations will actually move where there are resources. So if the resources move, so if your water source or your food source moves, some of those populations will move too. And so a good example of that is our blue crab here in Louisiana. Our blue crab loves the marsh. They love the estuary. The estuary is actually a part of the blue crab life cycle. And so blue crab, both juvenile and adults, use our estuary and our marshes. And they need those resources. They need the food, the habitat, they need the shelter that those marshes provide. And so our resources are very important here in our wetlands. We have a lot of populations here in our wetlands because we have a lot of resources. But one problem that we are facing is called habitat fragmentation. So fragmentation means something is being fragmented or broken up into pieces. And this is happening in our wetlands. And so what does this mean? Well, we are breaking up our marsh into pieces, basically. Why is this happening? Well, we have a lot of boats here in Louisiana. We have a lot of shipping. And so for shipping navigation, we have actually cut some channels through the marsh. And so it now creates this nice straight line through our marsh. And what was once one big piece of marsh is now broken up into two. So we may have cut another channel. And now we've broken it up again into 4 pieces. And so habitat fragmentation is a really big problem. Now, you might not know why that's a problem. Well, it does cause us to lose some resources, and so you're going to see some different populations and you see them change. But blue crab populations, when this habitat fragmentation happens, will actually increase really fast and then decrease. So, why is this happening? Well, let's go to Ms. Sam, who's going to talk to us about something called edge effect.
So Miss Sarah was just talking about habitat fragmentation. Now with habitat fragmentation, there's something else that we see along with the habitat fragmenting or being broken up into smaller pieces. And that is something called edge effect. So with our edge effect, we begin to see this as the habitat breaks up. So if you have one whole piece of marsh, like you see in this picture here, this has 4 edges, okay? You can see we made it easy here. We have it shaped like a square. So we have 4 edges to our marsh here. Now, remember what Miss Sarah said before about that habitat breaking up. A canal was cut through the middle, and now we have 2 pieces of marsh, okay? But let's now look at the number of edges that we have, okay? We have now freed up more edge habitat. And all that means is that is the habitat along the edge of the marsh. Now, you do have some species that actually will prefer that edge. That's their more preferred habitat. So you're going to find them more there than open water or in the middle of the marsh, okay? Like our little crabs tend to like the edge of our marsh habitat. So looking after we cut the canal, we now have more edges, okay? Because that's what happened when we cut it. Do we have less marsh? Maybe a little bit because some marsh was cut. Now, what happens when we cut another canal? So remember what Miss Sarah said. She said cut one and then she said another was cut. So if we cut it again, we end up with 4 pieces of marsh. Now with these 4 pieces of marsh, these are smaller pieces, but we have more edge. So remember before Miss Sarah said the blue crab population would go up at first? This is why. There's more of that habitat that they really, really like. Problem is there as much marsh? Not at all. So the problem is going to be right around here because these areas of marsh will continue to erode and canals can still be cut through, or this marsh can still be cut due to storms, canals. So when it's continued to be cut, you may have more edge, but you have less marsh in general. So as you begin to lose more and more marsh, and some of that marsh becomes open water, you've completely lost the edge habitat. You've lost your wetland habitat there in general because it's now become open water. And that is where your blue crab species starts to decline. Okay. So you do tend to see a peak with this. You see the numbers go really, really high. And then it reaches a point where it crashes because you've lost so much habitat. Now we got a really cool activity that's going to show you just that. So, few things you're going to need. Remember to always check our supply list that's on our website. You are going to need a whiteboard, a plastic pan like I'm using. You can use anything that your adult helper says is okay to write on with a dry erase marker. So, you need a dry erase marker, you need a ruler, paper towel, and you need the little crab images that we had on our supply list. So what you're going to do first, you're going to create your marsh. So use your dry erase marker, your ruler, and create a grid. Okay, yours does not have to be as big as mine is. You can even use pencil and paper here. Use pencil though, not pen, and you'll see why in a second. Go ahead, pause the video, create your grid. Once you've done that, I want you to put your little crab images. Remember I said crabs really like that edge habitat. So I'm going through and I'm putting my crabs at every other little block. I'm putting every other block because they don't really want to be right on top of each other. They don't want to have to compete for food. So I'm going to spread my little crabs out all over my grid. And remember, I'm telling you they really like that edge, so we're not going to put any in the middle. We're just focusing on edge right now. So once you've done that, you are ready for step 2. Now that they're all spread out, you can see mine here, but I have them spread out around my whole piece of marsh. Remember, the marsh gets cut up when we're dealing with habitat fragmentation and edge effect. So our marsh is cut, which means a canal is cut. Or there's different things that can damage our marsh, but we're going to focus on a canal because that's going to cut a straight line. So I'm going to take my paper towel and cut a canal through my marsh by erasing my line. So I cut one canal, okay, straight through the marsh. Now I'm going to add my little crabs because now I have more edge. But we are actually going to keep track of our numbers. So real quick before I add my crabs, I'm going to tell Miss Sarah, who's keeping track of numbers for me. When we started, we had one piece. And we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 crabs that fit around the outside of my marsh. Now I've cut one canal and I'm putting more crabs in. So I have one canal, but 2 pieces of marsh. And how many more crabs can I fit in? Let's see. And remember to spread them out. Okay, so I was able to add 5 more crabs. So now I have 21. Now, looking at this, we went up in crabs, which is exactly what we expected to see here, right? Because remember, that crab population goes up at first. But now we're going to cut a second canal. Maybe we now need to get through this way in our marsh instead of just this way. So I'm going to cut a canal. Do the same thing. Use your paper towel and erase part of your grid to cut that canal. If there's a little crab in the way, you're going to have to move him because his little habitat is being moved to open water and he will have to move to an area of marsh next to him. So I only had one little crab I had to move, but now I'm going to move him over here and then fill in your crabs. So I was able to add 5 more, so now I have 26. I have 4 pieces of marsh and I have 26 crabs. But remember, I told you that what happens is the canals are not only cut, but remember what's going to happen as boats continue to pass through, or just as waves pass through the waters in the canal. That's going to lead to erosion. Okay? So these sides of our canals are going to start to erode. We've got to show that on our model. So take your paper towel, go next to one of your canals, and I want you to start erasing part of the side of the canal. So I'm having to move some of my crabs so I can do that. So I'm going to say this area has eroded really badly. And now I can fit some of my crabs back in, but not all of them. So here I'm losing one. So I still have 4 pieces of marsh, but I've had some erosion and I have one crab that I've lost. Now let's cut another canal. So let's go all the way over here, and at this point, pick anywhere you want to in your model to cut your canal. So I'm going to cut one over here. Our goal is to cut 5, so that gives me 3. Remember to fill in your little crabs. So that brings me up to 28. I'm going to cut a canal over here. So this gives me 4 canals. And that's going to give me 30 crabs out here. And then I'm going to cut a canal over here. So this is canal number 5. And I am able to fit 32 crabs on my model. Okay? But like I said, you saw a little bit of erosion here. As we cut these other canals, there's still erosion taking place. So let's actually show that erosion. So this area of my marsh is going to have waves coming at it from both sides. So we're going to say this one has eroded very quickly. So I've lost 3 crabs. They no longer have a home. That area of marsh has eroded. Okay, so let's go next to another one of our canals. I'm going to pick this one. And we're going to erode away that side. 2 of my crabs lost their home. Now, I'm going to come over here. And this whole side here, let's say a storm has come through and has eroded this whole entire long canal, eroded the banks of it. That's 4 crabs now that have lost their home, their habitat. So as you can see, my numbers are starting to go down. But the difference between what I'm doing here and what's actually happening out in the marsh is here I'm picking spots that are eroding. Out, when you actually look at this happening in the marsh, it's not one spot that has erosion taking place. This whole area of marsh, every edge, every side of the marsh would be experiencing erosion. So it's not little by little like I showed here. It would be this section, this one, and this one all have erosion happening at the same time. Okay? So when we have this start to happen, that's where we start to really lose that marsh, and that is when your crab population starts to plummet. Okay? And they are losing that habitat that they are able to survive in. So when this happens, it's very problematic. We are seeing loss of marsh. We are also seeing this reflected in the populations of our crabs. So we have to figure out what's our next step. What do we do to be able to protect this population, protect our marsh, and be able to protect the communities of people that are living down in that area? So let's go see what Miss Sarah has to show us about how they're working to save these different communities along the Louisiana coast and in other places.
So Miss Sam just showed us about the edge effect and habitat fragmentation with blue crabs. Now, blue crabs are so important to our ecosystems and to our marshes because they are really important for their role that they play. They also use our marshes for resources and for habitat. And so we need to figure out how to protect our habitats and to stop this habitat fragmentation so that we can have things like blue crabs. So, one of the terrestrial solutions to habitat fragmentation are things like wildlife corridors. So, you may have seen this image behind me, and this is a really cool concept. So, they actually work to connect fragmented habitats by creating some type of connection between the two. In this case, they actually created a bridge over the road where wildlife can move from one habitat to another. Now, that's not as easy in the marsh, and so a solution to habitat fragmentation here on the coast is marsh creation. And marsh creation is being done here in South Louisiana by groups like CPRA, or the Coastal Protection and Restoration Authority. So, by restoring these marsh habitats and helping to connect those fragmented marshes, we can help our ecosystem to be better. And blue crabs are actually being used in these projects as environmental indicators. So we can see if the number of blue crabs is more in one place or another. Because remember, blue crab populations actually increase first when you see that habitat fragmentation because of that edge effect. And so if we see a high number of blue crabs in a fragmented marsh, we know that we need to restore it, and we can look at those populations to tell us if our restoration projects are working to restore those resources to our blue crabs. And so we had so much fun with this lesson today, looking at our crabs and looking at habitat fragmentation. But we want you to remember that these wildlife corridors or marsh creation projects are going to help fragmented habitats and create more healthy ecosystems for all of the creatures that live in our wetlands and in all of our ecosystems. So check out one of our other lessons, and we'll see you next time. Bye!
We hope you've enjoyed our sixth grade lesson, Losing the Edge, and we hope that you remember our hope for the coast for this lesson. And that is that wildlife corridors and marsh creation projects are being used to reconnect fragmented habitat, protecting the biodiversity of the area. We hope you join us for another lesson.